It was the Romans who said there is always something new from Africa. Today, these words are as true as when Pliny wrote them in the 1st century AD. At that time, the land of Ethiopia was already rich and powerful, one of the few parts of Africa to have found a steady pattern of nationhood. Today, the rest of the great continent has awakened from a sleep of centuries, and it looks with natural respect to this land which was old when history began. It is a land firmly based on the principles of the Christian faith, where tolerance, particularly in religious matters, is observed by all. It is a free land of free people, following the ways of enlightenment and progress. A land where the rich heritage of the past is being molded and adapted to the needs of today. For more than 30 centuries, Ethiopia has been ruled by a descendant of the Solomonic line. The present emperor, Haile Selassie I, has led his country through the ordeals of war to a peaceful and prosperous era of development. An era in which the words collective security again have meaning. A meaning of peace, of gardens to enjoy, and buildings in which to live. On many occasions, Ethiopia has taken the lead in bringing the nations together so that differences can be discussed and not fought about, and by so doing ensure that Africa can build for the future, even as Ethiopia herself is doing. The new city hall in Addis Ababa will be worthy of the community and the capital which it will serve. In its architecture, it will adapt the traditional to the contemporary idiom of design to produce a stately, pleasing building with terraced forecourt and ornamental water. Yes, there is always something new from Africa. As girder joins to girder and stone is placed on stone, a new Ethiopia is arising, firmly based upon the foundations of the old, and a new generation has come to enjoy the labors and the experience of those who toiled to make it so. In Ethiopia today, community development is considered of great importance. At Awassa, some 275 kilometers south of the capital, the ministry has set up a training and demonstration center to advance the policy of speedy social and economic progress in the rural areas. The principal of the center and his staff have the responsibility of instructing the workers who will go forth into the villages to show others how standards of living may be raised by the acceptance of new skills and modern methods. Three grades are catered for. Firstly, the village-level workers, whose task it is to create community feeling and make people interested in change and development. Secondly, the district development officers, who are the captains of the teams. And thirdly, the technicians, without whom 20th century progress is impossible. Side by side with the community development program is a big drive to improve health in both towns and country. Since the liberation, great progress has been made. The shattered services have been restored and extended, and at present, many new doctors and medical personnel are being trained in Ethiopia. particular emphasis is being laid on the quick provision of medical facilities in the more outlying areas. Clinics are being established, and many overseas nations and the World Health Organization are assisting in the task. The results of all this toiling can already be seen in the younger generation, which is happier and healthier than ever before. There are those whose lives can never be completely full. They are the ones who suffer from the tragedy of blindness. Here at Sabata, a new school has been opened where they receive the care and kindness which should be theirs by rights. Outside is the sunshine they will never see. But they can learn to read books, to fill their lives with work and pleasure, so that their loss of sight does not weigh so heavily upon them. Handicrafts are taught, and even the blind can earn to support themselves in life. North of Addis Ababa is Dessie, the capital of Wollo province, and one of the most historic towns in Ethiopia. In Dessie is the Waziro Sin, in which foreign teachers assist in the courses. It is another example of how countries of goodwill all over the world are helping Ethiopia in her modernization plans. One of the most important in the government's program for development. In Addis Ababa is the H.I.M Girls' School. It was founded in 1930 from the late Empress's own privy purse. Today, there are 1,600 boarding and day students who are being prepared to take their places in all walks of life. The system of free education which Ethiopia enjoys covers all grades from primary to college level. In every phase of it, His Imperial Majesty takes a personal interest. 10 years ago, his people wished to raise a monument to him. Characteristically, he replied that there could be no better monument to him than the fountain.
Not much remains unsaid for us to say on universities. The establishment of universities in the world dates many years back. And throughout those years, extensive service has been rendered by those who have graduated from these institutions in their respective assignments throughout the world, helping young Ethiopians to achieve Ethiopia's goals: education, labor, sacrifice, asking for the creation of a university that would offer the youth of Ethiopia an opportunity for higher education, especially in the fields of greatest national concern. And within 2 years, a report had been prepared that formed the basis of the university the Emperor chartered in December 1961. And he showed how deep and personal was his own concern by becoming its first chancellor, and even donating the grounds and buildings of his palace as the main campus. University is one of the largest universities in sub-Sahara Africa, with students from 13 other African countries. Providing 4,500 full-time and 4,000 part-time students with higher education. To meet the unique problems of Ethiopian society in the 7th decade of this century. And to use this knowledge wisely, for the public good, for the immediate national needs, rather than narrow selfish aims. And to make of the university a preserver of the Ethiopian cultural heritage. Years ago, Ethiopia called upon educators from around the world to staff its university. They came willingly, gave of themselves wholeheartedly. Some remain for the exchange of international ideas. Now many have departed, staying only long enough to see their Ethiopian students stand at the rostrum and take up the task. In 1961, less than 10% of the staff was Ethiopian. Today, it is nearly 50%, almost everyone a former student. Serve balanced the students' time spent on theory and basic learning. There is a sense of urgency at the university. The needs are so great, the demands for specialized skills so pressing. On donkeys, in teams of health officers, community nurses, and sanitarians, to ensure that people not easily reached are treated. They teach, treat, compile research material, a never-ending search for solutions to illnesses unique to Ethiopia. Not all the concerns are deep in the countryside, as with higher learning around the world increases. In the United States, at Oklahoma State University, a long and treasured association continues. Graduates of the Agriculture College at Alamaya travel halfway around the globe to continue their studies in a number of highly specialized fields associated with farming. Theirs is the typical story of modern Ethiopia's continuing desire for scientific advancement and progress. Trained and experienced physicians, they have voluntarily taken a leave of absence from their practice to come this vast distance to a center of modern medical study and research. Here they are students again, studying, learning to use the very latest in the life-saving techniques that are the hallmarks of medical science today. They are getting to be better doctors with this advanced, specialized training. They realize Ethiopia has many priorities that must be met before equipment like this is acquired. But once again, invaluable principles are being learned. when they return, Ethiopia will be the wiser for their experience and knowledge. With classes mostly at night, offers advanced educational opportunities to businessmen, former students determined to complete degree programs, to any and all who find fulfillment in the pursuit of knowledge. 10 years, a decade, half a generation. And yet in this short measure of time, Haile Selassie First University has set a firm impress on the cultural, social, and economic life of Ethiopia. The law school, only established since 1963, has graduated many outstanding attorneys. As well as judges who preside in the highest courts of the land. A Frenchman assisted in drafting the civil code, a Swiss the penal code, and an American in establishing the law school. But it is Ethiopians, finally, who administer the systems they have adopted for Ethiopia. An Ethiopian is chief surgeon at one of the major hospitals. A farmer, convinced of modern breeding methods by graduates of the College of Agriculture, proudly displays his new breed of milk cow, bought on.
Unlike former periods, when the greater part of town building depended upon imports, now Ethiopia, from her wealth of mineral resources, much of it still unexplored, provides more and more of her construction material. The mountainous country itself is the town planner's most valuable ally. It provides suitable and durable building material, and in addition, a steady supply of limestone and other materials for the production of cement. Automatic installations working non-stop process the raw material, and the finished product flows straight from the factory into the cement bag. Other branches of the economy, which were brought to a standstill by the late war, have been started up again everywhere. First, all the opportunities offered by the hidden wealth of the country were explored. Almost overnight, the state tobacco monopoly took charge of the needs of the smoker. Only a short step was needed from the production of hides from the large numbers of cattle to the manufacture of leather, and another from the manufacture of leather to the mechanized production of shoes. The textile industry is making great efforts to satisfy the requirements of the home market. The cotton mills in Diridawa are working day and night shifts. Steered by a steady hand, the Industrial Revolution took hold of Ethiopia. Imperceptibly, it molded the simple native, living close to nature, into a new and unfamiliar type, the industrial worker. But the mastermind that is the driving force behind all this pursues its aim with the prudence of an experienced pedagogue. Slowly and steadily, the youth of the country is being made familiar with its future task. Public opinion is kept informed of these developments. Journalists and editors report on the events of the day in newspapers written in Amharic, English, Arabic, and French. The Western model is easily discernible in the new mode of life, but it is not just being slavishly copied. For the soil in which the future grows is a tradition which dates back 3,000 years and which is never forgotten. Mass production meets the requirements of today, but folk art and handicrafts link the present with the past. Traditional ornaments and utensils are made from the ivory of tusks of elephants and buffalo horn. Traditional art of carpet making.
Adequate rainfall, which makes the raising of 2 crops a year possible. There are great rivers. The power from them is used in hydroelectric schemes. The harnessing of the country's natural resources in the service of the people is one of the major policies of the administration. And as a result, productivity increases, and with it, the standard of living improves. The water from the rivers is channeled to irrigate the lowland areas. And in these, productivity has been increased still further. And in the Awash Basin, as many as 3 crops of rice a year can be obtained. Of the Awash River are also used to irrigate the cotton fields at Tenderho. Cotton has been grown in Ethiopia since time immemorial. Up to now, it has been used largely for the cottage industries. But today, new textile plants are roaring, and official schemes like the one at Tenderho are aimed at making the country self-sufficient. Irrigation, too, has made possible the Wanji and Shoa sugar estates. 5.5 tons of water a second are used to supply the 6,600 hectares of cane. The sugar industry employs some 10,000 people, and in the milling season, 30 wheeled tractors are continuously in use, pulling hundreds of 4-ton cane carriers from the fields to the factories. 58,000 tons of plantation white sugar were produced last year. Cut cane is fed to the factories at the rate of 2,500 tons a day. This enterprise, started originally in 1951, now supplies all Ethiopia's home demand, and in 1961 exportation began in a small way. Today, the amount shipped abroad has already reached some 2,000 tons. A substantial percentage of the company's capital is owned by individual Ethiopian shareholders. Yes, Ethiopia is a land pleasant to dwell in. Standards of living are rising as the pace of industry and agriculture increases. The opportunities for gainful employment are many, and hopes for the future run high. Agriculture is still one of the main sources of livelihood for the people, and Ethiopia's cattle are considered by many to form her greatest economic potential. The cattle population of the country outnumbers the people themselves. Hides and skins figure prominently in the nation's export trade. A special animal breeding division of the Ministry of Agriculture has been set up, and there is a big drive to improve the strain. Every year, between 1.5 and 2 million cattle and more than 8 million sheep are slaughtered for food. In order that this may be done in the most hygienic manner possible, a new slaughterhouse is being built, which, when completed, will play a big part in making the operation of cattle keeping more profitable. Everywhere there is a drive for progress and prosperity. Buildings are going up. The pace and the amenities of life are increasing. The markets, which reflect more than anything else the prosperity of the people, are crowded. Very largely, this prosperity is due to the example and energy of His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor Haile Selassie I. Throughout the world, he is an honored figure, and his country is known to be a stable and profitable field for investment. The inspiration which stems from his personality has driven his country forward, and overseas his opinions are listened to with attention and respect. His tours abroad have won many friends for his country, and his influence has brought peace where once there threatened war. In 1963, he visited many lands. The book of his travels opened at the end of September, when he left his native Africa and the oldest of its lands to fly to the New World, to the United States of America. Washington awaited his coming. The land of Lincoln and all the power which it contains was his to command. Ever since the days of his dignified resistance to the fascist powers, his name has been a legend. And now preparations were made to honor him. President and Mrs. Kennedy were at the station as the train arrived. The young president greeted him. The man who, in his early 40s, had been called to lead the most powerful nation on earth, paid tribute to the emperor who had set an example to the world by his courage in the face of adversity and his single-minded determination to rebuild his land and set it on the road to progress once more. America wanted to greet the emperor, and on behalf of the people, the president welcomed him with these words.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know I speak in behalf of all of my fellow Americans in welcoming His Imperial Majesty back to the United States. In welcoming His Majesty, we honor not only a distinguished leader of his country and a distinguished world figure, but we also welcome a man whose place in history is already assured. His memorable and distinctive appearance before the League of Nations in the mid-30s, which so stirred the conscience of the world, that appearance was supported prior to that by action and has been supported in its high hopes by the consistent support which His Imperial Majesty has given to those efforts since the end of the Second War to associate three nations together in common enterprises. Support to the effort in Korea, the support of the most recent effort in the Congo, the strong support he has given to the United Nations, and perhaps most celebrated of all, his leadership in building a community of free and independent states in Africa. Since His Majesty visited the United States nearly a decade ago, we have seen one of the most extraordinary revolutions in history. And that has been the appearance on the world scene of 29 independent countries in the short space of less than 10 years, including over 150 million people. The conference recently held in His Majesty's capital served, I think, to bring together in a great cooperative movement the people of most of these countries. And the success of that conference was due in no small part to the leadership of our distinguished guest. Therefore, for what he has done in his own country, his efforts to move his country forward and provide a better life for its people, and his efforts throughout the world, which stretch back over 30 or 40 years, For all of this, Your Majesty, we take the greatest pride in welcoming you here. You do us honor, and I can assure you that there is no guest that we will receive in this country that will give a greater sense of livelier pride and satisfaction to the American people than your presence here today. Your Majesty, you're most welcome.
The Emperor replied. Mr. President, we are touched by your speech. Since we last visited the United States, there have been a large number of changes. America is a country of many different peoples from all parts of the world who have settled here. And one would not be mistaken if I called it a second home for all people. And then there was a state drive through the streets of Washington to the President's guest house. The people of the New World delighted to honor the ruler of one of the oldest lands in history, and nearly 200,000 people watched the procession. Just before lunch, His Imperial Majesty went aboard the Sequoia for a journey down the Potomac River. He was accompanied by Attorney General Robert Kennedy and the Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren. At the White House, he talked with President Kennedy. Nobody could have believed then that this man, called to lead his nation in troublous times, would in a few short weeks be dead. Already Kennedy, young in years yet old in wisdom, had made his impact on world affairs. His love of peace was the Emperor's own, yet death was to claim him before his work was done. That evening, His Imperial Majesty returned to the White House, there to attend a state banquet given in his honor. Was the President, and it was an occasion of pageantry and splendor. Next day, His Imperial Majesty paid tribute at the memorial of President Lincoln, the man who was the unifier of the nation. Of later events, the ceremony was of great significance, for Lincoln, like Kennedy, died by an assassin's gun. Lincoln, like Kennedy, struggled for the equality of all people, regardless of color and creed. The words of the Gettysburg Address take on an even greater meaning today. We here highly resolve that the dead shall not have died in vain, and that under God we shall have a new birth of freedom. The Emperor Haile Selassie I, in the name of his people, laid a solid silver wreath which will become a permanent part of the memorial. It was wrought from 580 Ethiopian coins. A helicopter of the United States Forces brought President Kennedy to the Woodmont Country Club, where he was to be guest at a state luncheon. Already a warm friendship had sprung up between the two heads of state. Later that day, they were to meet again, and a joint communique was signed. Before this, however, His Imperial Majesty drove to Georgetown University, where he was to receive an honorary degree. He was met by the president of the university, the Very Reverend Edward B. Bunn. Georgetown is the alma mater of all Catholic colleges in the United States. His Imperial Majesty received a doctorate in humane letters, honoris causa, as a king not alone by right of blood and succession, but by the title of his own merit and dedication. As an emperor, not by the resting force of armed conflict and conquest, but in the gentle victory of love and solicitude for his people. And so to New York, familiar the world over for its towering skyscrapers and temple of life. New York must easily be the busiest place in the world. His Imperial Majesty arrived at LaGuardia Airport, and Ethiopia's permanent representative at the United Nations, Dr. Tesfaye Ghebreyezu, was present. Honorable Robert F. Wagner and Mr. Ardley Stevenson welcomed the Emperor in the name of the city. Many Ethiopians resident in the United States added their own greetings to the man they know as Emperor. And what a reception the city of New York gave him. Traditional welcome is reserved for those whose exploits and achievements have captured the imagination of the people. The name of Haile Selassie I has been a legend for nearly 30 years, ever since those far-off days of fascist invasion and his dignified appeal to the League of Nations. Now, to admiration of his courage, has been added the love and respect which comes to those who toil hard in the service of others and in the cause of peace. It was a hero's welcome. All the way down Broadway, from the Battery to the Civic Hall, they cheered him. And when he left his car to walk amongst them, enthusiasm knew no bounds. Outside the City Hall, His Imperial Majesty received the keys of the city, the symbolic token of welcome. Soon was to follow the most important occasion of the whole visit to America, His Imperial Majesty's address to the General Assembly of the United Nations. He was received by Mr. U Thant. Ethiopia is one of the founder members of UNO. Miniature replicas of the obelisks of H.I.M were presented by His Imperial Majesty to Mr. U Thant as a decoration for the headquarters and as a symbol of Ethiopia's ever-readiness to share all that she has with the world community of nations. After lunch, the Emperor addressed the General Assembly, and he spoke again to the conscience of the world. 27 years ago, at the League of Nations in Geneva, we spoke of the aggressive invasion of our country and about the peace of the world in general. What we said in 1928 has proved to be true. And now, in the institution which has replaced the League of Nations, we have come to say what we feel about the present world situation.
የዚያ ለሚያሳፍር አኳኋን የፈረሰው የመንግስታት ማህበር ወራሽ በሆነው የዓለም ድርጅት ፊት ቃላችንን ለማሰማት ቆመናል። ይህኛውን የዓለም ድርጅት እኛ ጄኔቫ ላይ
The principle that we stood for then was collective security, and we still maintain the same principle today.
መሰረታዊ ዓላማ
We believe that peace can only be obtained when the rights of all nations, whether big or small, are respected. The United Nations, by maintaining the collective security principle, has been working to settle differences by peaceful means rather than by force. The result of this can be seen in the fact that most African and Asian countries have gained their freedom peacefully. All too soon, the time came to leave the United States and to fly on northwards to Canada. An aircraft of the Royal Canadian Air Force had been provided for the journey by Transport Command. His Imperial Majesty's return to the New World had been a triumphant success. Many affairs of state had been discussed, and agreements made of lasting advantage both to America and to Ethiopia. But now, it was farewell. The Emperor's immediate destination was Ottawa, the seat of government and the capital of Canada since 1858. His plane arrived at the Uplands Air Force Base. His Imperial Majesty is no stranger to Canada, and he was greeted by His Excellency the Governor-General and Madame Vanier. Inside a hangar, the Guard of Honor was drawn up. It was mounted by men of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and His Imperial Majesty carried out an inspection. The short journey from the airfield to the center of the capital was made by road. At Government House. During a previous stay there in 1954, the Emperor had planted a commemorative maple tree in the grounds. The maple leaf, of course, is Canada's national emblem. The headquarters of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were visited on the following day, and the Mounties performed their famous musical ride in his honor. The Mounties have become world famous. Stories of their exploits have been told and retold 1,000 times, and they are among the finest horsemen to be found anywhere. And then, at the War Memorial, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I honored the dead of 2 world wars. Thoughts of those later days of strife must have come fresh upon him as he moved towards the cenotaph to pay his nation's tribute to those of Canada who gave their lives to free the world. In hallowed stone and radiant flowers, their memory is kept fresh, that men may profit from the tragedies they knew and learn again the sad futility of war. Canada was short, and on the morning of the third day, His Imperial Majesty was again at the Uplands Air Force Base, there to begin his journey back to Africa. His Excellency, the Governor-General, and Prime Minister Lester Pearson were there to say goodbye. The route of his plane, the White Nile, took him across the wide Atlantic to the west coast of his native continent, to Guinea, where a tremendous welcome awaited him. He was accompanied throughout his tour by President Ahmed Sékou Touré, and the people made their pleasure at his coming plain to see. One of the Emperor's official engagements was the opening of the Kale Dam, which will supply power for the new hydroelectric plant at Grand Chute. His Imperial Majesty also visited the power station. The dam is an example of the progress which has already been made in Guinea since the achievement of independence in 1958. Another big welcome awaited His Imperial Majesty in Kindia. That evening, there was an after-dinner soiree, and part of the entertainment included a display of traditional dancing. Madame Sékou Touré and all the people spared nothing in their endeavors to make the Emperor welcome and to make his stay enjoyable. The night was spent in Kindia, and next morning the Emperor returned to the capital, Conakry, by helicopter. Neighboring Mali was the next place on the Emperor's wide itinerary. At Bamako Airport, he was welcomed by President Modibo Keïta, one of the continent's foremost statesmen. Future affairs were to bring these two men close together. Already the shadow of war had fallen across Africa, and in the outcome, it was to be the wise counsel of the Emperor and the President that led to a solution being reached. After the airport ceremonies were over, the two heads of state drove to the presidential palace at Koulouba. On the morning of the 15th of October, there was a big military parade in the Place de la Liberté, and all the population of Bamako seemed to be there to welcome their visitor. And then the march past began. The Malian army is a small but well-equipped force, admirably suited to the task of protecting the country. But the thought of war was constantly in the mind, for reports of the fighting on the Morocco-Algerian border were arriving hourly. Already His Imperial Majesty had offered his services as mediator, in an effort to bring about the end to the bloodshed and get the two parties together around the conference table. After the parade, the Emperor presented gifts to the Malian C&C General Soumare in the form of a gold-encrusted shield and a pair of lances. When President Modibo Keïta said farewell to his imperial guest, neither of them could have realized that they would be meeting again so soon. and then northwards to Morocco, where one of the highlights of the visit took place at Orica in Marrakesh province. The people welcomed him as the man most likely to preserve peace, and their joy was unrestrained. Lunch was taken at Orica as a guest of the provincial governor, after His Imperial Majesty had been entertained by the local horsemen. But for all the festivities and ceremonials of the visit, there was serious talking to be done. And the Emperor had several discussions with King Hassan, who earlier had been the host at a state dinner at the Bahia Palace in Marrakesh. The success of the Emperor's self-appointed task lay in the balance, and everybody prayed that he would succeed. Relaxation from the worries that beset him, His Imperial Majesty visited the souks or market area in the old part of Marrakesh. The souks of Morocco are famous, above all else, for the perfumes and wrought silver and gold ware which are sold. The traders welcomed him, and the Emperor bought several souvenirs. Examples of exquisite local craftsmanship to take back to Ethiopia with him. The history of Morocco goes back to the 6th century BC, when it was a Carthaginian trading post. But it is the later Moorish influence which gives the country its present character. Algeria, where he continued tireless in his pursuit of peace. Algeria has known all too recently the sound of fighting in the streets, the rattle of tanks, the shrieks of battle, and the agonies of conflict. Yet once again, war was threatening, as His Imperial Majesty drove to Maison Jolie, the residence of President Ahmed Ben Bella, for talks which would shape the future of the continent. Then, accompanied by the Foreign Minister, Monsieur Abdelaziz Bouteflika, the Emperor went for a tour of Algiers. From the heights of Saint Raphael, he gazed down on the city. His talks with the President and King Hassan had borne fruit. Both had agreed in principle to a meeting. Only the details remained to be settled. The people of Algiers received him as a peacemaker, the man who would spare them bloodshed and tears. And so, with part of his mission on the way to success, His Imperial Majesty took his leave of Algeria and President Ben Bella. And so, to Tunisia. Tunisia became independent less than 10 years ago. But even in that short time, President Bourguiba has earned a high reputation for statesmanship and good government. The drive from El Alouina Airport to the Palace of the 1st of June was unforgettable. There could be no doubt of the gratitude which all the peoples of North Africa felt for the Emperor, and time again the procession was halted for people bringing flowers. The two heads of state met several times during the visit, and many important talks took place between them. The Emperor found time to visit the ruins of Carthage. first founded 850 years before the birth of Christ. Once the center of Hannibal's power, Carthage became a Roman stronghold. Julius Caesar re-established a colony there, and it is of this period that most remains. In the evening, there was a state banquet at the presidential palace of Carthage, and President Bourguiba welcomed his guests, stressing again the friendship which exists between the two nations. The speech was one of warmth and friendliness, a speech of welcome and delight at the emperor's coming.
لا يمر اسمها بخاطرنا نحن معشر المسلمين دون أن نذكر بتأسف أنها كانت في فجر الإسلام مأوى أمينا وملجأ حصينا لأصحاب الرسول الذين فروا من إرهاق القريشيين.
He concluded by proposing a toast to Ethiopia, its emperor, and all its peoples, and the continuing friendship of the two countries. From Tunisia, His Imperial Majesty crossed the blue waters of the Mediterranean to Europe. He arrived in France at Orly Airport, Paris, where he was received by ministers of the Republic. Both Morocco and Algeria were until recently French territories, and his talks with President Charles de Gaulle were obviously of great importance. Meanwhile, the emperor's efforts to bring about peace were bearing fruit, but no word had yet arrived about the time and place where the opposing parties would meet. A pleasant interlude in the affairs of state was a reception held at the Imperial Embassy, Paris. Here the emperor met and talked with the Ethiopians resident in France. And then word came. Morocco and Algeria would meet in Bamako. In the capital of Mali, which he had left only a short while ago, His Imperial Majesty was greeted by President Modibo Keïta. The two heads of state were to act as mediators during the peace talks. This meeting was to be the climax of the emperor's search for peace in Africa. His work had succeeded where others had failed. Both countries were to meet under his chairmanship, and an agreement and ceasefire was signed. It called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and propaganda, and provided for a demilitarized zone patrolled by Ethiopian and Malian troops. Later, a conference of all the foreign ministers of Africa was to be held in Addis Ababa to find a permanent solution to the problem. Events have already told the full story. The emperor's achievement was complete. No longer did African fight African, and all the continent rejoiced with him and thanked him for his efforts in finding a solution to the problem that had once seemed insoluble. It was a great personal triumph for His Imperial Majesty. Africa, under his leadership, had set an example. It had shown the rest of the world the way to settle disputes between nations. So the pages of the book of travel were turned again, and the emperor flew to the Adriatic coast, to Yugoslavia, and a meeting with President Tito. A symbol of the resistance movement, fighter for liberty, President Tito has built a progressive, peaceful land from the war-shattered ruins of the old. His Imperial Majesty was to stay at the Palace of Gardenia. The problems which faced the Emperor and the President at the time of liberation were often similar, and now the two men talked of ways in which cooperation between their nations could be made closer for the mutual advantage of both. Ministers and advisors took part in the conversations, and at the end of the visit, a joint communique of friendship was signed. At the Metropole Hotel, the Emperor entertained his host and hostess at a state luncheon. Her Imperial Highness Ruth Dester acted as hostess. Evening of the visit to Yugoslavia, a gala reception was held at the Palace of the Federal Executive Council. The date was November the 2nd, the 33rd anniversary of the Emperor's accession, and everybody wanted to meet him and congratulate him on this particularly important occasion. Their glasses to him in a sincere tribute of affection and respect. Meanwhile, back in Addis Ababa, his people were giving thanks on this anniversary day. Religious services were held throughout the land, and it was a time for prayerful celebration. The people of Ethiopia have much to thank their emperor for. The solid achievements of his reign, notwithstanding the long period of war and oppression, are prodigious. The service at St. George's Church was attended by the Crown Prince, His Imperial Highness Asfar Wassat. Everybody in Ethiopia was waiting anxiously to add their own personal thanks to the congratulations he had already received. On the coronation anniversary, the Crown Prince received members of diplomatic missions in the throne room of the Imperial Palace. Many tributes were paid to the Emperor on this occasion, and the wish of everybody was that he should return safely home as soon as his mission was complete. In the evening, the Prime Minister, His Excellency Safi Tesaz Aklelu Habdewald, received his guests at a reception in the Gion Hotel. It was of particular significance that the date arranged for the Algeria-Morocco ceasefire coincided with the coronation anniversary, and it was a double celebration. The last day to its capital, Cairo. President Abdel Nasser greeted the Emperor as an old friend. These two men are near neighbors, separated only by the territories of the Sudan, and for that reason have many points of view in common. Thousands upon thousands of voices were raised in welcome as the heads of state drove to the palace of Kube, where the Emperor was to stay. During the course of the visit, there was plenty of evidence of the sincerity of the welcome which the people and their president extended to the visitor from the other end of the Red Sea. A visit was paid to the famous Tower of Cairo. From its eminence, it is possible to look down on the capital spread like a carpet below. The top of the tower revolves slowly, and the vista is one of continuous beauty. Private talks took place, at which many subjects were discussed, ranging from the reaching of a permanent settlement between Morocco and Algeria to the atomic test ban agreement. His Imperial Majesty invited President Nasser to visit Ethiopia, and the invitation was gratefully accepted. There was evidence in plenty of the friendly outcome of the talks.
Particulièrement sélective. La reine Élisabeth occupait ainsi une place de choix dans la hiérarchie secrète de ses affections personnelles. Et de même qu'il se souvenait de tous les torts, ceux de l'empereur et ceux des autres, il n'avait jamais oublié la lettre de Brighton. Et il éprouvait une tendresse filiale pour la jeune reine dont l'intelligence était au diapason de la sienne. et puis la politesse raffinée de la vie politique anglaise, qui a imposé à des ministres aussi formidables que Churchill ou Anthony Eden de se tenir. En effet, la sérénité de Windsor s'était trempée à l'acier des multiples révolutions d'État du Commonwealth dont elle était le chef.
Ampex via dal Vaticano, Ampex via dal Vaticano.
ብፁዕነቱን ለመጎብኘት ስንመጣ ዛሬ መጀመሪያችን ጊዜ አይደለም። በምንመጣበትም ዋናው ምክንያት በብፁዕነቱና በፊትም ከአባቶቹ ጋር ባሉት ሁሉ የካቶሊክና የኦርቶዶክስ ስም ልዩም ቢሆን በማናቸውም ቢሆን በእግዚአብሔር መንግስት የሚያዝበት እግዚአብሔር ነው እንጂ የሰዎች መለያየት የሚያልፍ ነገር ነው። ቢሆንም ኢትዮጵያ ከጥንት ጀምሮ ካቶሊኮች ናቸው ኦርቶዶክሶች ናቸው ብሎ ሳይለያይ ቢቆይም በእኛ ስራውን ለዚህ ከተመረጥን ጀምሮ በካቶሊክና በኦርቶዶክስ ብቻ ሳይሆን በማናቸውም ቢሆን ሃይማኖት ከራሱ የበለጠ ወደ እግዚአብሔር የሚያቀርበው የለምና ነፃነትን እንዲያገኝ ነው ያደረግነው። ወደ ብፁዕነቱም ለመገናኘት ስንመጣ በተለየ ደስ የሚለን ሰላምን የሚፈልጉ ለሰላም የሚደክሙ መሆኑን የምናስበው እና ይሄ መራመድ ለሰላም እንዲረዳ በማመን ጭምር ቢሆንም ሰላምን እወዳለሁ ማለት በአፍ በመናገር ብቻ ሳይሆን በስራ የሚገለጥበት ጊዜ እንዲደርስ እንጣጣርበት። እርሱ እንደሚደክሙት እኛም እንደክምበታለን ብለን የሁሉም መንፈስና ሀሳብ በዚህ ይሆናል ብለን ተስፋ ስለምናደርግ ነው። ስለ ሰላም ስናነሳ በሰው ልጆች መካከል በብዙ ቦታ ሰላም ከማጣት የተነሳ ደም መፋሰስም በብዙ ቦታ ላይ ይገኛል። አሁን ይሄንን ስናነሳ በዝርዝር ውስጥ ለመግባት ሳይሆን በድምር የሰላም ፈላጊዎችን ሁሉ እግዚአብሔር እንዲረዳቸው የቅዱስነቶም ጸሎት ለዚያው ለእውነተኛው ፈራጅ ለእግዚአብሔር እንዲያደርጉ ማመንም መለመንም ይገባናል ብለን ነው። ብፁዕነቶ እንደሚያውቁት በእኛና በኢጣሊያን መካከል መጀመሪያም በወዳጅነት ኋላም በመጋጨት የነበረውን ይህንን እንደተፋቀ በሙሉ ለማሳወቅ የጣሊያን መንግስት ፕሬዚዳንት ያደረጉልን ጥሪ ተቀብለን መተን ይህን ቁርጥ ሀሳባችንን ደግሞ መንፈሳችንና ልባችን እንዲመሰክር ያደረገው የጣሊያን ሕዝብ የጋለ አቀባበል አሳይቶናልም መስክሯልም ለማለት እንችላለን። የሰው ልጅ በኤጎይስትነት መጋጨቱ አይቀርም። ደግሞ ሰላምን ፈልጉ ያለው ፈጣሪያችን እሱን አሳዝነን እኛም ጉዳት እንዳንደርስ እርስ በራሳችን መተሳሰብና መዛመድ የእሱን የፈጣሪያችንን ቃል መስማት አለብን። ይህንን የማንፈጽም ከሆነ ለምን ክርስቶሳውያን ተብለን የእሱ ወገን ለምን ሆን ማለት ድረስ የሚያሳስብ ነው። ይህንን ጊዜ አጋጥሞን መናገር ብቻ አይደለም፣ በፊትም ሀገራችን ሳለን የምናስብበት ነው። ክቡርነቶም ብፁዕነቶም ስላደረጉልን አቀባበልን በጣም ከልብ እናመሰግናለን።
Your Holiness, this is not the first time I have visited the Vatican, nor is it the first time I have had the opportunity of talking to Your Holiness. I always paid homage to the Vatican and always was pleased to have the opportunity of encountering and discussing problems with you. One basic reason is that we Ethiopians are Christian nations. We have as a Christian nation, we have long-standing and satisfactory relations with the Catholic Church and the faith. Although we differ in name, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, but we must always remember we're all servants of the same Master, that is, our Creator. The Catholic faith and men of Catholic religion have contributed to the enrichment of our culture as well as to the enrichment of our religious services. Ethiopia has a long-standing tradition of religious tolerance and freedom. All different types of faith in our country are practiced with complete freedom and tolerance as guaranteed by the Constitution as well as by the custom of our people. I'm also glad, Your Holiness, to have this opportunity of meeting you today because of your contribution towards the maintenance of international peace and security. Your moral leadership throughout the world has been an outstanding example for men everywhere. And your effort on behalf of peace to maintain life upon the earth has been unmatched. Your leadership has not been solely in terms of beseeching mankind to follow a certain path, but through your own deeds, through your exemplary life, the life you led, you contribute to us the betterment of mankind. As everybody knows, the world is not at peace at the present time. Blood is being shed on the different parts of our planet. This is therefore a high time that under the moral leadership and all peace lovers in the world must join effort in fulfillment of the wish and the command of the Almighty. The relation between the Republic of Italy and Ethiopia, as is well known, has had some unfortunate moments, but the time has passed now. Difficulties among nations created, misunderstanding is created, because men tend to be egoistic. They tend to follow self-interest rather than universal interest, which in the long run is self-interest itself. But it is the responsibility of Your Holiness and others to make men realize that real interest of man and national interest in the long run and in the ultimate sense can only be protected by standing by values and commandments contained in our holy books. Since the time has changed, the unfortunate circumstances that created our difficulty with the state of Italy have changed. We have re-established peace. An era of cooperation and mutual respect has been restored. This has been amply manifested in the last few days by the cordial reception that has been accorded to me by the government and the President of Italy and the President of the Italian Republic. As I said earlier, conflicts between men is perhaps inevitable, so long as man has his limitation and so long as he can conceive of his interest in terms of the short run. But from a long run point of view, the brotherhood of man must be restored, and this is in accordance to interests of every individual. We must, in all our daily lives, try to affirm our belief in Christ and in the teachings of the Lord contained in the Bible. I wish to thank Your Holiness for the reception that you have just accorded me, and may I say, God bless your continued effort for maintenance of peace, and may God strengthen your moral leadership in the world. Thank you.
Majesté, nous vous remercions vivement des paroles si nobles et si élevées que vous venez de prononcer. Si Votre Majesté veut bien manifester sa satisfaction de se trouver ici, nous pouvons l'assurer que c'est pour nous une vraie joie de lui souhaiter la bienvenue dans notre demeure. Il y a longtemps, Majesté, nous le disons dans la sincérité de notre cœur, que nous attendions votre visite. Et c'est pourquoi nous nous étions permis, lors de notre entrevue à Genève l'an dernier, de formuler personnellement devant vous l'espoir de vous revoir ici. Votre présence est en effet significative à bien des égards. D'abord parce que l'Éthiopie a des liens anciens et très particuliers avec le Saint-Siège. La fondation du monastère et de l'église de Saint-Étienne des Abyssins au chevet de la basilique Vatican remonte bien haut dans les annales de la Rome chrétienne. Et par le fait de sa fidélité à une longue tradition, l'Éthiopie se trouve être aujourd'hui la seule nation du monde à posséder un collège ecclésiastique sur le territoire de la cité du Vatican. C'est en effet par la volonté de Pie XI que, lors de la constitution en État indépendant du petit territoire délimité par les accords du Latran, cette communauté reçut sur la colline Vatican un siège moderne et digne de votre patrie, le collège éthiopien d'aujourd'hui. À Pie XII, son successeur, était réservé la satisfaction d'accueillir un représentant permanent de votre pays auprès du Saint-Siège. Lui-même voulut se faire représenter à Addis Ababa en 1955 lors du 25e anniversaire du couronnement de votre Majesté. Tout récemment, enfin, le représentant d'Éthiopie auprès du Saint-Siège assumait le rang d'ambassadeur, tandis que l'internonciature apostolique à Addis Abeba était élevée au rang de nonciature. C'est assez dire l'ancienneté et la solidité des liens qui unissent votre patrie au Saint-Siège. Mais nous manquerions la vérité si nous ne faisions pas ici une mention explicite de ce que votre Majesté personnellement a fait et continue à faire en faveur de l'Église catholique et de ses institutions. Nous savons en particulier avec quelle générosité elle s'est intéressée au sort de l'université d'Asmara et de tant d'autres fondations catholiques à but religieux ou éducatif. Cette bienveillance active de votre Majesté appelle de notre part un sentiment de vive gratitude auquel nous sommes heureux de donner ici expression. C'est pour nous la précieuse garantie d'une cordialité toujours croissante entre l'autorité civile et la hiérarchie catholique en Éthiopie, et c'est aussi pour les catholiques éthiopiens une assurance pour la solution de questions qui leur tiennent à cœur, spécialement le rapprochement avec l'Église éthiopienne. La sollicitude de votre Majesté va bien au-delà des frontières de son pays. Elle rejoint la nôtre sur un terrain qui intéresse aujourd'hui de façon dramatique l'humanité tout entière. La grande cause de la paix entre les nations et l'accélération du développement dans les pays du tiers-monde. Qu'il nous soit permis de rendre hommage ici, publiquement, puisque l'occasion nous en est donnée, à la contribution apportée par votre Majesté en maintes circonstances à cette double cause. Votre Majesté a montré combien elle est sensible au rôle des valeurs morales et spirituelles dans un monde où la force brutale semble parfois menacer de vouloir tout submerger. Dieu veuille bénir les efforts de votre Majesté en ce domaine et lui accorder, au lendemain du 40e anniversaire de son couronnement, l'occasion de déployer encore longtemps ses énergies au service de son pays qui, dans le respect des droits de l'homme et la compréhension entre les peuples qui le composent, trouvera les chemins du progrès et de la tranquillité. C'est le vœu que nous formons de tout cœur, en remerciant à nouveau Votre Majesté de sa visite qui nous honore, et en invoquant sur sa personne, sur sa famille impériale, sur les autorités religieuses et civiles de son pays et sur toute la chair nation éthiopienne, les plus abondantes bénédictions divines.
Addis Ababa and all its people awaited him. Members of the royal family and the government welcomed him back. His travels had had a deep effect on Ethiopia's standing abroad. In Africa, the people looked on him as the man who had brought peace where war existed. A man who had persuaded warring states to set an example of amity to the world. Indeed, the name of Ethiopia stood high. At long last, His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie I, was back amongst his people. His grandchildren hurried to add the personal greetings of youth, delighted to see him home again. Throughout the years of his reign, the Emperor Haile Selassie I has devoted himself to the causes of his people and his country. At home and abroad, he has achieved the distinction of being the foremost statesman and leader in Africa. His name is known the world over. Now his people heard his long familiar voice again as he replied to the welcome speeches. And then, the drive from the Boli International Airport to the Imperial Palace began. The pride which the people of Ethiopia feel in the emperor was plainly to be seen. His travels had raised the prestige of his country to new heights, and at the same time, he had established himself as a peacemaker and a renowned and beloved leader in Africa.